Hey guys, welcome back to another edition of the Cool Sports Network. I am your host, Chase Coburn, and today I am joined by a very special guest, a Baltimore Ravens writer and columnist for the Baltimore Sun, Mike Preston. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you coming on. You're one of the best writers out there for Baltimore sports. So it's going to be great to talk to you about the Ravens. And something that I love about your writing is you are brutally honest with your assessment of Ravens games and how they are as a team. How are you able to write honestly about the team, good or bad, while still keeping a good relationship with the players and staff in the organization?
Just be honest. It's an opinion. If people can't handle it, that's their problem, not mine. You just state what's going on, what you see, and they have to accept it. And unfortunately, in this town, because Baltimore is such a blue collar city, um, most of the people really do understand. You have some fans who are just diehard fans and just say, "Oh, he doesn't know what he's talking about. He doesn't like the Ravens." But I think deep down inside, they understand the problems, and especially a lot of the younger people, especially the younger men. Men love to fix problems. Okay, they always have an answer for problems. So when you look at the Ravens, you ask, "What's the problem?" They all have an answer. Hey, I know what it is. I know what it is. So it's all fun and games, and that's the way I treat it, and I've always treated it that way.
Yes, and that's one of the reasons why I always go to you, for information right after a Ravens game is because I really want to hear your honest opinion and all the things you really think about the Ravens. And it also helps me covering the team, hearing another perspective from someone like you. And you've had this perspective for a long time. You've been covering sports in Baltimore since before the Ravens were even a franchise. In the eyes of a local sports writer, how did the culture in the city change once the Ravens became an NFL team?
It's kind of interesting the dynamics of what went on. Before, when I was coming up, and I'm talking about in the 70s and 80s, I think Baltimore was still a split between a baseball and a football team. But then once the football team left, everybody started jumping on the Oriole bandwagon because that's all that was left. And through those years of expansion and trying to get a team, oh gosh, I missed football. I still love the game, but I missed football. But I had to cover the Redskins, I had to cover the Eagles, but we didn't have our own team. And then you go through the expansion derby, and Baltimore still doesn't get a team. And then in 95, 96, you start hearing, some rumors about Art Modell moving his team here. And it was strange in itself because they got the Browns just like Indianapolis took the Colts.
Right.
And fortunately for the Colt fans, they took the name, they took the jerseys. I still miss the logo. I still love that Colt logo on the side. Um, it didn't happen in Baltimore. And that was kind of refreshing in a way because you got your own identity, you got a new group, or a new generation of people. So they had their own identity, their own fans, and it took off again. And what's kind of cool now is watching that the Orioles had been so bad for so long, and then all of a sudden they're back in the picture, and you start seeing more fans at the games. But Baltimore's still a football town. They won't forget their blue collar roots. They can't forget what's involved. They played the best game ever in 1958 in that championship
Right.
game. They lost to the New York Jets in Super Bowl III in the biggest upset in NFL history. But yet they get a team here and they win two Super Bowls. And if you look at the NFL, there are a lot of teams that have never been to a Super Bowl, and
Right.
yet the Ravens have won two since 1996. That's impressive. That's a good deal. But I think Baltimore's still a football town.
Absolutely. And we're really going to get into how the Ravens have been so competitive for so long. But it's interesting you really mentioned how Baltimore is a football town. Last month, I spoke to Ravens play by play announcer Jerry Sandusky on the podcast. And obviously, he has a lot of roots to the Baltimore Colts with his dad being a coach for the team and his just growing up in Baltimore and being a part of that city. So it's very interesting you bring that up. And he really mentioned how he thinks it is fair what happened to the Browns, how you get rid of a team. However, that city gets their team back, they get their brand back, they get their history back compared to what
Right.
Baltimore had. And I think it was a very interesting perspective in that way. Do you still feel a little bitter that, the Johnny Unitas records and all the that history is in Indianapolis?
Of course. I mean, you go up to the Hall of Fame. So you got John Unitas over there with the Indianapolis Colts. I mean, he never played for them. You talk to
Right.
some old Colts. There's some of those guys that were bitter about that move and what happened. But there are parallels. Poor ownership. Poor ownership in Cleveland with Modell and what was going on there. Poor ownership in Baltimore with Robert Irsay and what happened in this city. But still, they're both back in the NFL. I mean, they're storied, fabled franchises that found their way back into the NFL. That's the best thing about this. And one of the better things is they play each other every year. That Cleveland Baltimore rivalry is very strong. I can remember, and this will be an indictment of my age. I can remember when the first time they played them, and Brian Billick, the head coach of the Ravens, was laying the framework for it, telling the referees, "We're going back to play the Browns. We don't want you to cheat us when we go back and play them. Call a fair game." He took me in his office and kind of outlined the whole way of the way he wanted the story run, which was fascinating. And I was glad to read it because I got the scoop of like, coach is sounding off. This is cool. And I, I love them being in this division. Cleveland, Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, they're all very similar towns, all blue collar towns. Fans are pretty loyal. So when you go watch these two teams play, all of these teams play. These are pretty intense rivalries. They belong in the AFC North.
They do, and that's why it's considered one of the greatest divisions in football. You mentioned Johnny Unitas. You're right. He's not a part, in my opinion, he shouldn't be a part of Indianapolis Colts history. And there's a reason why the Golden Arm does have a statue outside of M&T Bank Stadium. But a point you did mention earlier was about how much success the Ravens have had since becoming a franchise in not even that long of a time frame. And we've really never seen this franchise go through a rebuilding process, including the seamless transition from Joe Flacco to Lamar Jackson. What is it about Ozzie Newsome and now Eric DaCosta and the environment they created that's allowed Baltimore to stay so competitive and avoid, really going into that rebuilding position?
You just mentioned it, front office. You look at Ozzie Newsome, who learned the game from Bill Belichick.
Right.
And it comes here, and then Art Modell makes him the first African American general manager in the National Football League. The stability there. Then you have Eric DaCosta, who Ozzie kind of groomed and basically stepped down and said, "He can have my position. I'm done, but this is the guy you want." So you see that. You also go and look at the head coaches. They've only had three. All right. And you look at some of these other teams in the NFL. Oh my gosh. I mean, it's like a traffic jam in New York City of all these coaches that come through. You look at the quarterback situation. I mean, and the Ravens have had their trials and errors at the quarterback position. But basically, you had Joe Flacco forever. And then all of a sudden, you get Lamar Jackson for 6 or 7 years. There's stability there. You look at their draft record. I mean, how many people? We look at Ozzie Newsome. How many people draft two Hall of Famers with the first two picks? Jonathan Ogden, Ray Lewis.
Not only Hall of Famers, like some of the greatest players ever. Like
Right.
really, like
And then you go to Ed Reed. Marshall Yonder might get in. Uh, it just goes on and on. It's stability in the front office. And you look at some of the guys that just left who retired, they had been there 30 or 40 years. Continuity is a key in the National Football League, especially when you're good at something you do. And you look at the longevity of it. And one of the best things I can say about this organization, let's just forget about the football. they're good people.
Yeah.
I mean, and I don't even want to get into names because I'll leave some people out. But for the most part, they're good quality people and they work extremely hard. And I think sometimes fans tend to forget that these people are human beings first. But for the most part, they have had some great hires. People have stayed around for a long time. And go look at the guys that have left and moved on. I mean, look at their defensive staff, coaching staff from last year.
Right.
Those three guys would go on and become coordinators, and then one became a head coach in Seattle. So, oh, this is impressive. I mean, you kind of watch what goes on here, and sometimes people get a little jaded and say, well, they didn't win a Super Bowl. Lamar Jackson hasn't won a Super Bowl. There are a lot of teams, a lot of people who would love to be in the situation that the Ravens are because you're competing. You're in position, and as Kenny Cooper, the former Blast coach, used to say, you got to be in position to be in position. Well, the Ravens are always in position to challenge.
You're 100% right. And just the culture the organization has kind of created since they became a franchise has been terrific. And you're right, it's made them one of the more successful franchises in NFL history. We do need to get into some of the negatives, though, that currently exist on this Baltimore Ravens team, I guess you can say. Now, they do have Lamar Jackson. He's a two-time MVP, one of the more dominant quarterbacks in the NFL. And since he stepped in, the Ravens have been one of the more dominant teams in the NFL. However, it's only resulted in 2 playoff wins in 6 years. What is it about Lamar that makes him such a dominant force in the regular season, but that also makes him, I guess you could say, crash out in the postseason?
Great athlete, um, great player, versatility. But I think what happens to him, and we've seen it for the last 6 years, is teams take away the running game. Joe Cullen, who used to be the defensive line coach here in Kansas City, basically, I mean, he showed you how you beat him. Again, you take away the running game and you make him beat you to the outside
Right.
where he's got to throw the ball. And that's his weakness. Can't throw the ball down the field consistently. And to do that, you also have to have a receiver who can go out and get the ball. Who's the wide receiver? Is it Rashad Bateman, the great enigma for the 2024 season? We'll see. But they don't have that guy. I think with Lamar, he's fantastic as far as throwing the ball inside, keeping it short, mid-range game. But when teams force him to stay in the pocket, make those passes down the field, for whatever reason, he can't get it done. And I think last year against Kansas City, the team panicked. I think what happened was Kansas City came out, scored the first 2 times they had the ball. The Ravens said, "Oh, we're in a shootout. We're in a shootout." No, you're not. You're not in a shootout. You're playing against a team that had the number 25 run defense in the NFL. Run the football. I mean, and the best teams, and you look at the history of the NFL, some of the best teams could run the football, and the Ravens could not do that. And I think part of it was they panicked as far as their offense coordinator. But I think Lamar also panicked where he was he got in that little game with Patrick Mahomes of, okay, this is between the 2 quarterbacks. I'm going to show him better than him. And he checked out some of the running plays, which John Harbaugh has admitted, twice now that happened. And you can't do that.
Right.
Play within the structure of the game. And that's what goes on with this football team. And it's happened in the past. And, it's going to happen again this year. I'm telling you, they're going to come out. They're going to try to stop Derrick Henry. And they're going to say, Lamar, beat us down the field. You have to beat us down the field. And it's going to happen again. And we'll see what happens.
Right. Overall, because you mentioned, some of the falters of the offensive coordinator. You mentioned Lamar was really, trying to play that Mahomes versus Jackson game when the Ravens clearly had the better team, in my opinion, last year. Overall, when you look at kind of new roster constructions, here and there, and yet there's no postseason success, who are you really pointing your finger at? Is it John Harbaugh or is it Lamar Jackson?
I point at that as a team. See, because people try to find these little simple solutions. It's Lamar's fault. It's John Harbaugh's fault. Well, your defense came out and you gave up 2 touchdowns right off the bat to Patrick Mahomes. And I give Andy Reid credit. because he slowed that game down after he came out and said, they don't have it today. We can milk this a little bit because we got a lead. And that's exactly what he did. And Mahomes made the plays at the end of the game. Lamar couldn't make the plays at the end. And you could see him struggling at times, got sacked 4 times, the fumble, and so forth. But they still had the chance to win the game. But there's so many things. I mean, their secondary was decimated by injuries. They started to get better by the end of the season, but they had problems there. The pass rush was sufficient, but Mahomes is a mobile quarterback like Lamar, but he plays a better game. You know, people said Lamar was the MVP last year, but I'm not even going to argue that. But my MVP every year is Patrick Mahomes. He's been in the AFC Championship game, 5 years, and he's won like 3 Super Bowl titles or whatever it is. He's the guy. The road to the Super Bowl goes through Kansas City and Patrick Mahomes. So there's a whole bunch of things. I mean, their offensive line couldn't pass block last year, and that's been a problem. There's so many areas to look at, and I'm not sure about their offensive line if they upgraded enough there to get that done. We'll see. They have some weaknesses. I mean, do they have a shot? Can they win the Super Bowl? Of course. Most teams in the NFL can win the Super Bowl, but you got to get hot at the right time. That's the key. Kansas City got hot at the right time because no one thought they were going to win the Super Bowl. Middle of the season, near the end, they're struggling, and all of a sudden,
Think about on Christmas when the Ravens came into San Francisco and won. The Chiefs had just blown their game at home to Las Vegas. I don't think anyone could have predicted that day that Kansas City would go on to beat the Ravens in Baltimore.
Correct. And then all of a sudden, you got to get hot. And you go back and look at the history of the Ravens. I mean, we'll go back to 2000. Okay, they had 5 games where they didn't score a touchdown. 5 games. Can you imagine it? 5 games where you don't score a touchdown. And then all of a sudden, Brian Bullock goes, wait a minute here. We got this guy named Jamal Lewis. Let's run the football and let our defense take control of this game. And they did. So they win the Super Bowl. Okay, you go back and look at 2012, whenever Joe Flacco just took off. I mean, he was the hottest quarterback in the NFL at the time. All right. And you remember a couple weeks before, he throws the interception against Denver and he's stretched out laying on the ground. And I'm like, oh my God, this guy has died. It's like somebody sniped him from the top row of M&T Bank Stadium. And all of a sudden you're like, they're dead. They're dead. And then he kind of picks it up and then he gets hot. All right. You have to do that. The hot teams are really, really picking it up down the stretch. The Ravens haven't been that hot. I thought last year they had the best team in the NFL, but they just came up short. And you got to carry through. And you got to beat Kansas City in your place, in your house, in the AFC Championship game. You have to win that game. And maybe that drives this team because they've made some steps, but maybe this is what gets them through that to say, we've tasted this, we've smelled this before. Now let's see if we can get it done.
You're right on. And something I think the Ravens have done amazingly, but also poorly, is they've been an incredible team in November and December, but they clearly seem to not peak at the right time compared to literally, as you just mentioned, what we saw from Kansas City. And I felt the 2012 Ravens were another great example. I mean, in mid December that year, I don't think anyone could have told you that that team was going to go on to win the Super Bowl, go into Denver as a 2 touchdown underdog and win. And now it's just such a magical team all around. However, things I think are looking positive for Baltimore this year after they added a guy, you mentioned him. They added Derrick Henry, one of the better running backs in the NFL. How do you think King Henry overall will help this team this coming year?
Well, it depends on how they use him. He's got some age on him. But last year when he was in Tennessee, they didn't have a very good offensive line. He still, came out and played extremely well. The other day I watched practice and he darts inside at right guard and then bounces outside and outruns Roquan Smith around the corner. And I'm like, oh my God, I don't see many people outrun Roquan. And I don't know Smith's angle of pursuit. All I know is he beat him around the corner and then he just took off. And I'm like, yeah. I mean, the key for him is to get him to the edge where he can square his pads because corners do not want to hit 235, 245-pound running backs. All right. Nobody wants that. Safeties don't want that. Now, how do they use him? He's not going to come out and carry the ball 30, 35 times a game. How much does he have left in the tank? We'll find out at the end of the season. It's kind of interesting. If they keep Mitchell back, that would help. That adds that
Change your
bump
pace back.
outside. Yeah. That adds the bump outside, that speed. But again, it comes down to their offensive line. They got so many different rotations going on with this offensive line that you really don't know what's going to happen. And we'll go a little deeper here. Is Ronnie Stanley, is he healthy? He looks good. He's playing well, but
Has he been healthy the last 4 years? I mean,
right. So, but he's bigger. His lower body is bigger. He did some work in the offseason, but can it hold up? I mean, after so many years and several major ankle surgeries, you look on the other side, Patrick McCary, they got him supposedly starting at right tackle. Can his body hold up? I mean, here's a guy struggled with back and leg problems. Can he hold up? Who's going to be your two guards? Voorhees, second-year guy who's coming off a major injury. Who's going to be your other guard? We don't know. There's so many things going on. Even with Lindenbaum at center, he hasn't practiced in 5 straight practices because of soft tissue injuries. What does that mean? I don't have the slightest idea. But he's the guy you got to take care of because he's the guy who makes the calls. He sets the rotation for their offensive line. So you look at that area, and then you look at who's going to be their pass rushers. I mean, last year they had Chuck Smith as their pass rushing guru, who's very good. The guy's excellent. But you had Jadeveon Clowney, the team, who had 9.5 sacks. You had Matabike, who had 13. But who's going to be the guy? Matabike is going to be very good. But is Van Noy the guy?
right. Maybe Owe.
31. I mean, and if you look at most of the games, the rotation was set to stop Clowney. Well, then all of a sudden, you got Kyle on the other side. Okay, we got to shut him down. Dafi Owe, I've seen him play lights out before in camp and then disappear in games. David Ojabo, I don't know. We don't know, but those are the two elements that have to come together for this team to win. You got to be able to rush the passer. You got to be able to protect the passer. And I don't know if the Ravens can do that. I think they can still go far and do their thing, but those are the two groups that I'm going to watch very hard this season to see if it comes together for them.
Right. And I think, they usually say the team that wins the line of scrimmage is going to win the football game. And if your two areas of the line of scrimmage are your weaknesses, as good as your other players are, it is going to be hard to win the football game. And it really is unfortunate. And it's mainly been because they've had to save salaries, they've had to add other playmakers to the offense. But 2 years ago, I mean, Kevin Zeitler and Ben Powers was possibly the best, guard to guard duo on any offensive line in football. And now they've lost both the past 2 off seasons. And you're right. Now they're really reliant on, McCary and Stanley, 2 injury prone veterans, to really take that next step. And it's going to be difficult. As for the pass rush, they will have to deal with a new defensive coordinator. Zach Orr was hired there to replace Mike McDonald, who, went to be a head coach at Seattle. Do you expect, because I mean, last year, Baltimore statistically had probably the best defense in the National Football League, whether it was takeaways, sacks, points, yardage, whatever it was. Do you expect what perhaps was the best defense in football last year to take a step back in production now with a new coordinator?
It's going to be interesting because those assistant coaches were very close to the players. And sometimes it takes a year to build that. A key to playing hard for your coach, your position coach, is you have to have a respect for them. Well, do they have the time? Have they had the time to develop that respect? I don't know. That's going to be interesting to watch. Zach Orr, when you're coaching, all right, are you going to be listening more to your players because you're close to the same age, or you're going to let John Harbaugh dictate to you and tell you what to do?
Mhm.
because Mike McDonald was not going to let John Harbaugh tell him how to run his defense. That was not going to happen. Okay. But Zach Orr, hey, what's going to happen there? I don't know. It's all interesting to watch the dynamics of what's going to happen with this team. I mean, Anthony Weaver, who's now the defensive coordinator in Miami, was very well liked. And he was the defensive line coach last year, and I thought maybe he had a shot at being the DC here. But can you replace that guy? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But sometimes it takes time. You just don't come in overnight and say, "Hey, I'm your new defensive line coach, and everything's fine and dandy, and I'm going to tell you how to play." You earn that respect, and that's what you see is going to go on with the Ravens. And maybe it happens, maybe it doesn't, but that's a key thing to watch is how do they develop that relationship.
And that's why it's really unfortunate last season because it seemed that from the coaching staff to the offense to the defense, even the special teams, that everything was supposed to come together. The Ravens stayed generally healthy. I know they didn't have Mark Andrews for that second half of the season mainly. I know he came back for the AFC Championship, but they generally stayed healthy and were productive on offense, defense, special teams, and in the coaching staff, and they still couldn't get it done. I think that is the frustrating part, and there may be a little bit of that transition period, during this season, and maybe that will, take a dip in their production in a sense, I guess you could say. But earlier last season, I had Ravens defensive tackle, you just mentioned him, Justin Madubuike, onto the show, and he was Baltimore's main breakout star last year. So, who's the player you've had on your radar as you're kind of looking at training camp that can really make that next leap and be this year's Justin Madubuike for Baltimore?
Oh my, that's an interesting question here. Let's look at Travis Jones. Uh, big guy, but 3'6'4". I guess Travis goes about 325, 336, somewhere in there. Whatever he decided to eat that today. If he ate a couple, was a couple pizzas from Pizza Hut. Playing extremely well. Um, he's going to get some time in. I think he might be as good as Broderick Washington right now. Um, Michael Pierce will probably split some time with him also because this guy can play inside. He can play two gap. He can play anywhere along the defensive line. Um, he's the guy I think is going to have a great season, and he has that body. And you watch him, and you saw that with Justin last year, where for the first year or two, then all of a sudden he starts getting in that weight room, and all of a sudden you see that body starting to take off. And you see that. You saw it with Jonathan Ogden. You saw it with Ray Lewis. I swear, when Ray Lewis got here, I think he weighed about 210 pounds. And I remember going up to Ozzy, sitting in the lobby, and I said, "Ozzy, that's your middle linebacker?" And Ozzy goes, "You'll see. You'll see." You get him in the weight room for a year or two, and then all of a sudden, whoa. Well, you watch some of these guys and you see that going on and you say, "Hey, Travis, nice season in the weight room." You saw it with Voorhees, another guy who's the guard, a guy who couldn't even run around the field last year this time. And then I'm watching him now and I'm like, "Oh my, what happened to this fella?" All of a sudden he got big. I think he's going to be very good, smart player. Down the road, and it may not happen this year, but maybe next year he's going to take off. You saw that with Linderbaum. I mean, he was getting overpowered his first year, and then the second and third year, all of a sudden, whoa, this guy can move, he can run, he can make blocks into the second, third level. You see that happen, especially strong seasons in the weight room. So those are the guys that I'm looking at. Stevens, their cornerback. I mean, he came from nowhere. I mean, last year, all of a sudden, he's playing safety, then they play him at corner. And then you're watching this year, and man, he's up there. He has no fear. Man, he's like banging people, smacking the pee out of people in practice, pressing up on them. I'm like, uh-oh, he's got the swag back. Here's a starter. And it's a contract year for him. He's going to make some bank. So you got to watch him too. But interesting team, interesting dynamics all the way around. And we'll see what happens, but it's kind of fun. You know what I mean? And I wrote a column this week about how boring training camp is. That's a good thing. You want it to be boring. I mean, because usually if it's not, you're getting a rebuilding mode. You're in that rebuilding mode. You got a lot of transition, and also you usually get a lot of injuries. The injuries have been slight so far, but I mean, you can go to sleep at training camp right now and still kind of pick out the guys who are going to be starters. But that makes it fun. We'll see what happens. I'm pumped about this year.
I mean, that's football. It's always so much fun to really watch these storylines. Mike, I just have two more questions because I know we are running a little short on time. A lot of Ravens fans, I think, are disappointed after some of the last few postseasons compared to what they did in the regular season. What would be your message to make Ravens fans feel good about what could possibly happen this coming year?
Got Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry, Lamar Jackson. There's a whole bunch of positives. You got Simpson now playing in place of Patrick Queen. That guy can run. I think he's going to be a very good player. You got Roquan, and he's the face of this team. All right, he's the guy you build your team around. Smart guy, always one of the first ones on the field.
You wrote about it just recently.
Yes, Marlon Humphrey lost weight. He's playing lights out. I mean, and I think, remember last year people were saying, oh, you need to trade Marlon Humphrey, this, that. And I'm like, no, the guy's had injuries. Give him a shot. He's playing well. There are a lot of things to build on. You got two of the best tight ends, a good tandem of tight ends. Isaiah Likely, Mark Andrews. You can work with that. You got a coordinator back on offense who's in his second year. Monken, well, that's a plus. So we'll see what happens. One of the keys for this team is Bateman. Do you become the number one receiver on this team? You don't have to be great. You just have to deliver on the outside because you got Flowers on the inside. You got the tight ends. You got Aguilar, the veteran. They need that guy who can make the plays down the field. Is it Mr. Enigma? Could be. Defensively, their secondary is loaded. I mean, they're really good. Three safeties, which is what they did a lot last year. Remember, they had a guy coming off the corner, Mr. Kyle Hamilton. And Seattle will play that style. I heard they're playing that in Tennessee now because it was so successful here in Baltimore. So there's a lot of things in place. But again, what do you do in crunch time? Can you make it happen in the playoffs? I don't care about MVPs. Dan Marino won MVPs. Ask Dan Marino, what was the worst thing that ever happened to him throughout his NFL career? He didn't win a Super Bowl. Fran Tarkenton, and I will date myself there too, didn't win a Super Bowl. Jim Kelly, Hall of Famer, didn't win a Super Bowl. All right? You got to win the trophy.
Okay.
As Terrell Suggs used to say, man, I got to get me some Lombardi. That's what it's all about. You got to get some Lombardi. All right? That's the bottom line to it. All right? And Lamar's in his 7th year. You got to win that. And that's the bottom line. That's the make or break. I don't care about AFC North. I don't care about anything. Get to the bowl and see what happens.
I think Ravens fans would absolutely love. They got some Lombardi this year. Mike Preston, this has been great. I know you've been mentioning a lot today. We'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. In your gut, just watching this team in previous years and seeing what they look like this year, what would you predict on what the Ravens will achieve this coming year?
Let's put it to you this way. If they go 6-2 through the first half of the season, they'll be in pretty good shape because that second half is brutal. I don't know what John Harbaugh did to piss off the NFL. Playing 3 games in 12 days and then 3 games in 10 days or whatever, which is ridiculous considering the league keeps coming out and saying, we emphasize player safety, but we're going to make all these games. And then they're playing on Christmas. How do you play on Christmas night again for the 2nd year in a row?
And on the road.
Yeah, he takes somebody off. I mean, it's clearly evident that somebody doesn't like him. But if you get through that first half where you can get enough wins, because You're probably going to stumble, and you're going to have some injuries playing that many games in a short period of time. That could add up, but get through the first half first, and that will be the key for this football team. And also, Chase, I want to tell you, Jerry Sandusky and I were teammates at Towson University, so
Really?
we know each other very well. Yes,
Wow,
yes,
that's awesome.
yeah,
I knew you guys both play football. I did not know you guys overlap. That's awesome.
yes. So we're cool with each other. So
Absolutely. You guys are both awesome people. You've both been on the podcast. Mike Preston, we're going to wrap this up. I really appreciate you coming on. I know you're very busy. So, really appreciate you taking this time to talk some Ravens football with me today. Again, I really appreciate it.
no problem, man. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
I'm so glad, and we will all be rooting for the Ravens this year. So, we're looking forward to it. Audience, I hope you guys did enjoy this episode alongside one of the lead Baltimore Ravens writers for the Baltimore Sun, Mike Preston. I am Chase Coburn, and we will see you next time right here from the Cool Sports Network. Take care.